Welcome. And now I'd like to introduce our ace guest host for today's program. Robin Cale has always been an avid reader. From sneaking copies of Judy Blume from her childhood library to developing her own radio program, Reading with Robin, in 2002, Robin is a literary influencer and book pusher in her own right. Over the past 15 years, Robin has built a devoted and passionate following both in her local Rhode Island and online. In addition to her talk show, Robin has hosted numerous author events, including her annual Evening with Authors and Summer with Robin. We are very pleased to have her back in the reading room. Is this our fourth? This is our fourth Summer Reads panel in Bryant Park. Please join me in welcoming Robin Cale.
Thank you so much, Susie, and thank you for having me back. Is this loud enough? Can you guys hear? It's an awesome band over there. Don't listen to it. It's really good, though. Welcome to Bryant Park's famed reading room. I'm thrilled to be here for the fourth summer and to kick off the summer reading series and the season. And the way it's going to go is I will introduce each author. They will talk a little bit about their books. There will be no spoilers because you're going to all want to buy them, John, afterwards. They are all fabulous. There's something for everyone. We have contemporary fiction, we have historical fiction, and we have a thriller. So whatever you love, they're all great. Oh my God, that really is a loud band. So afterwards, we'll go into a conversation. Then we'll open it up for Q&A. So get your cues ready. And then afterwards, as Susie said, the authors will be thrilled to sign copies of your books. First up, Aimee Brenner grew up in suburban Philadelphia on a steady diet of Norma Klein, Judy Blume, and Judith Krantz novels. After studying literature at George Washington University, she moved to New York City, where she started her career at HarperCollins Publishers, then later BarnesandNoble.com and Vogue.com, before returning to her love of books and becoming an author. Well, returning to books and becoming an author and love. Her novel, The Forever Summer, is a national bestseller, and her latest novel, The Husband Hour, is out now. She lives in New York City with her husband and teenage daughters. Welcome, Aimee Brenner.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Robin for hosting us today, moderating, and thank you, Susie Siegel, for putting this whole thing together. Thank you, Kundikanaya Books, and thanks for everyone showing up on this fortunately beautiful day. I didn't know how it was going to turn out, but we're all good. And I'm thrilled to be here with Sally and Aimee. I was fortunate enough to actually do an event with Robin last spring at her Point Street reading series when my first beach novel, The Forever Summer, published. The Forever Summer is a story of 3 generations of women who discover family secrets in Provincetown, Cape Cod. For my new book, The Husband Hour, I thought I'd do something a little different. Instead of looking at an intergenerational story, I was just going to focus on a marriage. And I found that as I tried to write about marriage, I couldn't do it without also looking at the broader family. The Husband Hour is about a young woman named Lauren Kincaid who marries her high school sweetheart only to lose him suddenly when he dies in this very public way. And to deal with this, she retreats to her family beach house, looking for total privacy and seclusion. Instead, she is followed there by her mother, her sister, her father, and ultimately she's tracked down by a documentary filmmaker looking to tell her husband's story. I knew I needed a good setting for this book. I also knew I could not go back to Provincetown because the quirky exuberance of that place was wrong for this book. I thought, where can I go for calm and quiet and a sense of security? And I thought, okay, I can go to the beach town I went to growing up, and that's the Jersey Shore. So I sent Lauren packing to Longport, New Jersey, to a home handed down from her grandparents called the Green Gable. It has ocean views and a pool, but the real draw is that it's empty until the start of the summer when her family descends on the house. So The Husband Hour really is about the role of our parents and siblings in our adult lives. Lauren thinks she's going to deal with her grief by being alone. Her mother has other ideas. And while the documentary filmmaker is looking to tell the truth about her husband, he actually ends up provoking much larger revelations over the course of the summer.
Awesome. How great does that sound, right? And you could hear it, yeah? Okay. It sounded loud to me. Next up, Sally Koslow, Another Side of Paradise, published just yesterday. It's brandy new and has been called captivating by people and dishy with a side of rye by Oprah.com. After 4 contemporary novels, including the international bestseller, The Late Lamented Molly Marks, and her debut, Little Pink Slips, an insider's view of the magazine industry, which she knows only too well, but that's another story. This is Sally's first biographical novel. Sally lives in Manhattan, but hopes the statute of limitation never ends on mentioning that she was born and raised in Fargo, North Dakota. Welcome, Sally Koslow.
Thank you, Robin. Can you hear me? And it's great to be here with Jamie and Aimee, and I like the symmetry of that. I've read both of their books. They're wonderful. And Robin and I go way back, because I think we go back to the late lamented Molly Marks.
We go way back.
Yeah.
So yes, we do.
I always wanted to write a biographical novel, which is a specific kind of historical novel. I never was interested in writing a sort of random historical novel from the point of view of, say, Cleopatra's handmaiden, a made-up person. I read Loving Frank years ago. Anyone here read Loving Frank? It was about Mame of Borthwick Cheney, the mistress of Frank Lloyd Wright, and I just found it a fascinating way to learn about history. So in the back of my mind, I thought I would write such a book. And then my mother-in-law said to me one day, she's probably Turner Classic Movies' most devout follower of movies, said, "Sally, why don't you write a love story?" And that was in the back of my mind also. And I was reading another author's biographical novel about the last years of F. Scott Fitzgerald's life, and I was an English major. I loved every book F. Scott Fitzgerald ever wrote, knew nothing about his later life, knew him only from the jazz age, and I hit on the part in this other author's book about Sheila Graham, who was one of, that's really competitive, all this noise. She was, even though her legend hasn't stuck around like those Mean Girls, Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons, back in the day, Sheila Graham was a very well-known gossip columnist whose work was syndicated in 178 newspapers, which was more than Luella and Hedda combined. In any event, she was the last lover of F. Scott Fitzgerald, and I thought, whoa, this is interesting. So I started researching her and found out that she had an astonishing life. She was raised in a Dickensian orphanage in London. She was Jewish, which she denied, but she felt guilty about it for the rest of her life. And she was a complete invention who could have popped out of one of F. Scott Fitzgerald's novels. She has striking similarity to Jay Gatsby. And so in the path of reinventing herself, first as a showgirl, next as a Fleet Street English reporter, next as a New York reporter, she became a gossip columnist in Hollywood. And on the night of her engagement party to an Irish nobleman, she ran into F. Scott Fitzgerald at a party given by Richard Bentley, and it was kismet. And even though she had a big whopping diamond on her hand, she accepted a date from Scott Fitzgerald, who was, of course, married. He was still married to Zelda Fitzgerald, who's sadly been institutionalized for many years already. And the two of them had an extraordinary bond. And the book is a combination of the backstory for Sheila, growing up in London, poor and essentially alone in an orphanage, with a side trip to Germany as the Nazis are taking hold. And mostly it's a Hollywood story. And there are walk-on parts of many characters you would recognize. And spoiler alert, Scott Fitzgerald dies. So it's the story of someone who's not quite a widow. And That's all I want to tell you, because I hope you'll buy it and read it. Thank you.
Thanks, Sally. I'm never going to complain about the cappuccino machines at a coffee shop event again. I might. And last, but certainly not least, Aimee Molloy is the author of the New York Times bestseller, However Long the Night, Molly Melching's Journey to Help Millions of African Women and Girls Triumph, and the co-author of several nonfiction books. An electrifying thriller and a subtle, savvy skewering of the endless expectations of motherhood, a People magazine book of the week. Her new novel, The Perfect Mother, is also a New York Times bestseller. She lives in Brooklyn with her husband and her 2 daughters. Welcome to the reading room.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And this is one of my favorite places in the city, so it's especially nice to be here today. So The Perfect Mother is, as Robin said, it's a thriller, a book of domestic suspense, and it's the story of the May Mothers, who are a group of women and 1 man in Brooklyn who become friends after all having babies at the same time in May. And so they get together while they're pregnant to share advice, to share their anxieties, and after the babies are born, they begin to meet twice a week in Prospect Park. When the babies are 6 weeks old, they decide that they need a night away from the babies for the first time. And so they plan to meet out for drinks on the night of July 4th. And in doing so, they sort of organize the night around helping out Winnie, who's the quiet single mom of the group. And she's reluctant to go, but they really sort of put a lot of pressure on her. They hire a babysitter for her, and they go out for a drink. And of course, that night, while they're out drinking too much, they get the phone call that the babysitter had fallen asleep on the couch, and when she woke up, Midas, Winnie's 6-week-old son, has been taken from his crib. So the book takes place in the 13 days following this incident, and it follows 3 members of the May Mothers who, while dealing with sleep deprivation and having a newborn, become increasingly convinced that the police are bungling the investigation and increasingly determined to go to great lengths and do whatever it takes to find Midas before it's too late. It's HarperCollins published it, and I like to joke with them because they talk about The Perfect Mother as this, gripping, page-turning thriller of the summer, and I like to think about it as a quiet meditation on motherhood. At the time when I've written nonfiction for 10 years, and when I had my first kid, I was like, okay, I finally have something that I really want to explore in a novel. And so at the time I was reading these really sort of beautiful and weighty books about motherhood, like Department of Speculation by Jenny Ofel, which is gorgeous, and this book 11 Hours by Pamela Aarons, which follows a woman through 11 hours for labor and her relationship that she develops with the midwife. And so I really was, trying to find my way into how do I write a novel about motherhood that's as beautiful, and it turned out that I'm not nearly as smart enough to do that. And so after I had my second, a year later, I read Gone Girl, and I read most of it sort of in the middle of the night, while nursing this baby, and I couldn't wait till everybody left the house so I could just be alone with my kid and this book. And so that was when I had the idea that I would try to kind of do both of these things, to write a book that really explores the pressures that women face after having kids, and is sort of this feminist skewering, I hope, of society and what we expect of women, but to wrap it up in a real sort of page-turning book of suspense.
Well done. Like I said, all 3 books so different, so there are certain commonalities, but such great books. Thank you for giving me such wonderful books to work on for planning for this, because they're all so good. These are, like you said, you couldn't wait to be alone with your baby in the book. And to me, that's the kind of book I want to read. I want to know it's waiting for me, or, whenever you can grab some time. Do you ever hear that? People will say things to me like, oh, I wish I had time to read, or I don't know how. Do you ever hear that? I hate hearing. I don't like that. I don't know how you have time to read. Do you ever get that? Yeah, what do you say, Jamie?
I mean, I don't know how you don't have time to read. That's the way I feel.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
It sort of sounds patronizing when people say it. I don't know if you guys ever hear that. I don't know how you read or something like that. Anyway, do you guys get that, Sally, Aimee?
Yes, but then I think, well, they don't have a phone. because if you buy some books on Kindle and you load them on you get the Kindle app, you can have you're standing in line in the bank and you can read 2 or 3 pages. So there's no excuse anymore.
Right. Read wherever you are. Yeah. Just read. So at the heart of all 3 novels, there are lies and secrets, fundamental to the storyline. So when you began writing, I was wondering, did you have all of the secrets and lies where they were going to be stored, or did some of them reveal themselves as the story was taking place, without giving anything away?
You know, I didn't. It was my first novel, and it was my first thriller. And I actually did not read a lot of thrillers at the time. And so, you know, I had this idea. I always had the end of the book. And a lot of this book, I think a lot of like what people are responding to is there's a couple of really big twists that happen in the book, which I'll never talk about. But I didn't actually have them. The big twist, like the real big twist, I think that like helped me get an agent and sell the book came to me 80% of the way through.
Oh, wow.
And so, you know, I was just writing sort of blindly, and I was drawn to these characters. And I was drawn to like what was happening with them, and I just kind of had to trust that the mystery part of it and like the plotting of it was all gonna turn out. And I mean, it thank God it did. I'm now in the process of writing my second book, and I'm doing the same thing, and I'm like, I'm not so sure it's actually going to happen again. So, yeah, I'm trying to be better with knowing where I'm going.
Cool. Well, I'm glad to hear you're writing your second one.
When you write a biographical novel, you build off a skeleton of facts, but you don't go with every fact available to you, because then you would be going down a very odd series of rabbit holes that probably would not knit into a plot. You have to add and subtract and, of course, make up all the dialogue. I knew what Sheila Graham's secrets were, but I had to figure out the shape of the book, and that was the challenge.
So there's a very big family secret and twist in The Husband Hour, and I did know about it from the beginning. And now that I'm trying to write my next book, I'm like, wow, I was really lucky that happened, because when you write about families and secrets, I think sometimes you start with the idea of what's going to be revealed, and other times it's a lot of work to have that payoff for the reader. So I had one experience with The Husband Hour where it came to me and I was lucky, and now I'm struggling with figuring out for the next book. So I think twists and secrets, I mean, I think it's one of the hardest parts of putting a story together.
Well, and as the reader, I don't really want to try and figure out too much. But lately I do. Yours I did not see coming out. That was really... But there are some books that, you know, you just think, oh, was that a clue? Is that a little, you know, just a little nugget? When you're reading, do you try and figure out? Or do you just let it ride?
Well, I just read a book that's like a beach book and a wedding story, but they have a murder in it. And the whole time I was trying to figure out, and I thought I got it, and I was wrong. And it's the sign of a great writer. Book? It's Ellen Hildebrand's The Perfect Couple, which is coming out in like 2 weeks. And I was sure I had it. I told my husband, I figured this out. Totally wrong.
That's good, because I'm sure you were all wondering which book, right? I couldn't let that pass.
I was going to save it for a reveal. It's like a novel. I would have told them later.
Okay. Well, I didn't want to forget, you know, selfishly. And as far as backstory and giving the reader enough information, because it's important so that you can sort of understand the character and the motivation, how do you do that and keep the mystery intact, but let the reader know just enough? And enough about the character, have them be sympathetic, while not maybe likable, but to understand their motivations.
Well, in my book, the backstory is very important, and I told it in third person, where I told the contemporary story, the Hollywood story, in first person, which is probably nothing a reader would notice, but it was a technique that sorted it out for me. And I found the backstory extremely interesting for Sheila Graham, because I've always been fascinated by people who invent themselves. I mean, I had a chance to invent myself when I moved from Fargo, North Dakota to Manhattan. I did not. You can see I'm still riding on the coattails of Fargo. But I had such admiration for her grit and her resolve, and people like that always fascinated me. So I had to explain how she got to be the person who could move to Hollywood with no context whatsoever and start writing immediately about Clark Gable's fat neck and be ostracized. She made her mistakes.
I actually find that that's one of the most challenging parts of writing fiction, is that you have this backstory that is really important to the characters, and it's really important to you as a writer, but you have to kind of discern how much of it is important to the reader and how much of it is important to the story. And so, I think that it's the challenge, because it's all about pacing. At least with the thriller, it's all about pacing. And so anything that you do that's going to slow somebody down, or you never want anybody to stop, even like at a chapter, you want them to keep going. But then how do you talk about like the relationship with their mother when they were 6? So, I don't know. I feel, to me, the only way you learn that is by reading. I've never taken a writing course. I've never studied writing in any way whatsoever, but I've read everything, and I feel like that's when it's like a feel. It's kind of like being blind and just feeling your way around it to know how to get the pacing on that right.
That's really cool. So there are people that say take classes, go to all these things, and you would say...
No, you can, but I would use that money and buy books. That's what I would
study
suggest.
The books. Read
no
what
MFA.
No MFA. I don't know.
No bread loaf. No MFA.
No, I don't know.
You live in Brooklyn, right?
Or live in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Where it's just writing seeps into your blood through the coffee or something.
And just move to Brooklyn and it all works. Jamie, do you want to?
Well, I was going to say also, I think going to hear other authors talk is really helpful. I heard Kristen Hanna when she was doing an event for the Nightingale. And on the topic of backstory, she said something that stayed with me, and that is just the backstory serves the front story. So just whatever you're doing with the backstory, make sure it's in service to what's happening with the forward momentum. And that was really important advice, and because backstory is so challenging, as Aimee was saying, I think about that a lot. So whether you're taking a class or just learning by reading, I think hearing people talk, especially authors who talk about the hard part of writing, is one of the best places to learn.
Yeah.
Another thing, obviously, with all of these books, the research, and I don't usually ask research questions because I don't really care that much usually. However, and certainly in Another Side of Paradise, it was fascinating to learn about Sheila Graham, and when you went back and we learned where she's from, but certainly head injuries and things you would have had to research. And are you going to just tell me you made all this stuff up, Aimee? I don't know, but talk a little bit about the research, and then something maybe you didn't get to use that you might use somewhere else, or something that was just so fascinating but there was no place to put it.
Well, my research was I had a baby, and then I made sure that baby got abducted. And then I was like, okay, now what happens?
Well, don't say if the baby comes back.
Just kidding.
Don't tell us.
I was, a lot of it was based on my own experience of joining a mommy group when after I had my first kid, and then it was, people say, is it, because it's 3 main characters, and I've been asked a lot, are they based on real people, that you knew that were moms, and they're just actually all based on me. It was my way of working through, Francie has a lot of postpartum anxiety, and she's she doesn't know what she's doing, and that was me. And Colette was a ghostwriter who was in the middle of writing a book, and she lost her brain stopped working, and that was me, and then Nell really likes to drink margaritas, and that's also me. So I think it was just more of I didn't have to do any research.
And they say writers are self-absorbed. Silly.
Well, I had to do a lot of research, obviously, because it was a historical novel, but some of it was idiosyncratic research. It wasn't all reading. I tried to read as many of Sheila Graham's columns as I could find, and I read her. She was the very definition of an unreliable narrator, because she wrote quite a few memoirs, and she changed her story from memoir to memoir, so I was able to pick the version that served my plot the best. And of course I read many biographies, etc. But the thing that I didn't expect was having to research things like when women started to wear nylon stockings. Because in a book that's historical, the minute you make a mistake, the readers give up on you. It takes the reader out of the story, and they don't want to continue with you. And so I did a lot of odd research of that sort.
For The Husband Hour, even though it's fiction, it's based on a few true stories that really stuck with me. One of them was I saw Bradley Cooper doing an interview on the CBS Morning Show when he was promoting the film American Sniper, which is the true story of Chris Kyle, who served 4 tours in Iraq before being killed back at home by a fellow vet with PTSD. And he left behind a wife and children. And his wife, Taya, joined Bradley Cooper for the interview. And as soon as she started talking, for me, the story of American Sniper became not the story of a soldier, but the story of a marriage. And I became very interested in military marriage. Is it different than a regular marriage? And I decided that in some ways it had to be like marriage on steroids. You know, marriage is stressful and complicated under the best of circumstances. But you add in long absences and injury and the threat of losing your spouse. And all of that adds up. And I wanted to explore the idea of marriage. If you lose your spouse in combat, he or she is automatically a hero. But no person is perfect, no marriage is perfect. So what happens when you lose someone and then your marriage can never be discussed as anything real? Your marriage has to be sort of codified as this perfect thing. And that's what I wanted to explore with the Husband Hour.
Don't you want to read all of these books? In The Perfect Mother, one of the May mothers, Colette, says she reflects that since she had a daughter, words have become like wisps of air, outpacing her brain's ability to capture them. As writers, what happens when you, I don't want to say writer's block, but when you just can't capture those words?
That's when you read.
Do you do that? You pick something up?
Well,
Yeah.
I really like to have a high-quality book going when I'm writing, because I will stop and sometimes do like search and replace in my manuscript and improve the words that I've chosen. It doesn't have to actually be a novel. It could be nonfiction. It could be Vanity Fair, Wall Street Journal, or something else that's well written. But I couldn't do, when my children were young, 5:30 was like the witching hour. I was coming home from my job as a magazine editor and trying to make that transition into family dinner. Or maybe it was 6:30, maybe it was 7. But now that my kids are out of the house, I can consider that reading time at the end of the afternoon when my brain is fried, and I really value it.
Do you specifically choose a book not in your genre, or can it be anything that you want to read?
I don't read too many biographical novels because not that many of them come out that really interest me, but I read in a lot of genres. But I stop reading a book if I feel it's mediocre.
You have to.
Well, I don't want to drag down my own writing. I try to
Right.
read writing that's better than mine so that I can aspire to stretching myself.
In terms of not finding the words or struggling with writing, you know, there's that saying, writing is rewriting. And for me, I really just focus on getting the story down, even if it's coming out terribly, because I know you can always go back and make the language work or make the telling more beautiful. But you can't fix it. You can't have that singing language without that messy first draft or getting the scene down. So I don't really worry that much about the craft of the words at all until I feel like the whole thing is done. And for me, that's something that happens later, not simultaneously while trying to tell the story in the most effective way, structurally.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to hear you say that, because I'm in the process now of getting down a first draft, and it's torture. It's so torture. And I have 110 pages, and I have gone back to the first 40 like a gazillion times, because every time I get stuck, I'm like, I'll just go back and edit those. But yeah, you have to remember that. And I'm with Sally. I have a stack of books that I keep next to my desk, and which are just writers who I think like their prose is amazing, and I can just pick it up. I could literally read one sentence of like something like Toni Morrison or Joshua Ferris has written, and then I'm like, oh, I'm back. Like, it really helps a lot.
Those are some of the writers that are inspiring to you.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
I have a whole, yeah.
And all three of your books have, well, certainly yours, Sally, but have writers in them. You have writers, you all have writers, so I was wondering how your experience as a writer informs the writers in your stories. What of your writing experience do you sort of give to your characters?
Well, I would like to say F. Scott Fitzgerald learned everything he knew from me, but sadly that's not the case.
The dates don't add up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I was a ghostwriter for 10 years, as I've said, and that was how I was making my living. And it's a very weird way of writing because you're actually, you write a book for somebody who's famous, and then their name goes on the cover, and then, they go on Good Morning America and talk about the process of writing this book. And
can you tell us who?
No.
Or still not? No.
I've written some that I've gotten credit for, so you can look up those. But I wrote Rosewater, which was made into a movie by Jon Stewart that I wrote with Maziar Bahari and stuff. But yeah, so I mean, I have so much to say about ghostwriting that I'm saving, I think, and I don't know what I'm going to do with it. But it was fun for me to go into that a little bit with the character of Colette in the book. She's a ghostwriter for the mayor, who's this cute guy who's he's kind of like a young Obama, and she's really struggling with everything about it, and including for her and this is what happened with me when I had these two little girls, and there was something about that I thought now is the time that I want to stop letting other people, especially men, take credit for my words. And so for me that was a big impetus to say okay, I'm going to go off on my own. And so, with Colette in the book, she's dealing with some of that.
Oh no, Susie just gave me the sign. Does that mean questions? Oh dear, all right. Well, before we take questions, I would just like to know what everybody's reading, recommending, recently read, because everybody wants to know, right? What are these guys reading?
So as I mentioned earlier, I did just finish reading The Perfect Couple by Ellen Hildebrand. That's the Nantucket wedding story with a murder in it. Beautifully done. There's another book that's coming out in July. Susie, is your book coming out in July?
Yes.
Susie Orman-Schnall, who's here, has a book called Subway Girls, which is a dual timeline, 1940s New York with the Miss Subway contest, also current day. And I love when an author can pull off dual stories that intersect. I think that's a special narrative gift. So I highly recommend that one as well.
I love Pachinko, which is a family saga by Hin Jin Lee. It's about relationship between Koreans and the Japanese. I knew nothing about it. It was very long. It could have been 1,000 pages, and I would have stayed with it. I have a soft spot for writers who write serious subjects but can write funny. And The Dark Flood Rises by Dame Margaret Drabble, who's a classic writer from England, is about the subject of death. And my book club discussed it for 2 hours. It was fascinating. Wow. I really urge it on people. And I in your genre, I read these books. These were great. I read The Woman in the Window. I thought that was interesting. Quite a few others, but those top the list.
And Aimee?
The book that I'm most looking forward to is Lauren Groff has a book of short stories called Florida that's coming out, I think, I don't know when actually, but soonish. One of the short stories was in the New Yorker about these two little girls who are lost on an island raising themselves, and I think what she's doing. And I don't know if you saw this, but she was just interviewed in the New York Times Book Review. Did you see this? By the book, where the authors ask writers these personal questions about them, and you have to just read this column. Lauren Groff. I mean, she just slays. She's taking down the patriarchy just by herself, and even in this column, the way that she answers these questions. So that's the one that I'm trying to kind of explore short stories. And Joshua Ferris, as I said. Dinner Party is his book of short stories, and it's out in paperback, I think, yesterday.
Yeah.
So,
and just if I can jump on that, I should have remembered that the last book I read was Curtis Sittenfeld's stories. If you see it, I'll say it. I think that's the title.
Yeah, something like that.
And I usually don't like short stories because I feel incomplete, but they were amazing.
Yeah, she's amazing.
And I will add The High Season by Judy Blundell because I just read it and loved it, and it's like Summer Delicious, Ruman Alam's That Kind of Mother, and Camille Perry's When Katie Met Cassidy for something a little different. So I hope you were writing all those down. Also, before we take Q&A, find everybody on Facebook, follow them, Instagram, Twitter, send them love messages, Goodreads, all of that stuff. So now we'll take questions? Okay, who has questions? Mindy has a question.
This one's for Sally. I wanted to know if you liked Sheila.
Ah.
Yes, she was.
like what?
Did I like Sheila Graham? Yes, very much. She was deeply flawed, but I liked that about her. I could understand why she made some of the decisions she made, even though I'm Jewish and part of me was offended that she pretended she wasn't. I could understand in the context of living in England pre-World War II and having no family at all, why it was easier for her to try to pretend that she was someone she wasn't. And I loved how self-sufficient she was. A man never supported her, and she raised 2 children. She was very hardworking, and I always admire a woman with a strong work ethic.
Susie has a question.
I have a question. Were there other working titles of your books as you went along?
No, I had this title before I even had the story. So there was going to be a title, even if there was no book, that title was going to happen somehow.
Same for me. I suggested the title, and I've written a book that way too. I wrote this book called The Late Lamented Molly Marks. I thought of a title sitting in someone's funeral, and then I had to write a book to match it.
Yeah, and for me, it was actually like I still have PTSD when I think about titling this book because I'm part of this writing group, and it was every week, you know, I would come with like 20 new suggestions, and it was rough. And then it was somebody said The Perfect Mother, and I was like, oh, I guess that could work. And then that was how I pitched it. And then the editor was like, you know, loved it, and I didn't see it at the time, but
Are you all in writers groups?
I am. I'm in an ad hoc writers workshop with 3 other writers. We've been meeting. We met in a formal writing workshop, and I picked off these 3 people who I thought kind of got my stuff, who I learned from, and we write very different material. One of the women is a science professor, and she writes about the nexus of science and comedy. And someone else has written a wonderful memoir about leaving Hasidism, and the other person has a book out for submission on a very obscure mental condition. And we're just a great team. I think it's really valuable.
Jamie?
I'm in a 2-person writing group, and that's me and my husband, who's forced to endure, who's also my agent.
What
but
a great team.
He has to endure all of my complaints and
any time of day and
drafts.
night.
Day and night, he's on call.
On call.
So I'm actually, I didn't realize it till just now, but I'm calling it a writer's group, so I don't feel bad anymore.
You can probably write that off, too.
That's right, absolutely.
Just claim it somewhere.
I have a question for Aimee. I've read the other 2 books, and they're amazing, and I'm very excited to read your book. So my question is this. When I write, I cry a lot when I'm writing. Like, I'll write and cry because it's sad, and that's how I know I'm really into it. And it always comes out well if I'm crying that part always. But if you're writing a thriller, and I don't really read a lot of thrillers because I'm very easily spooked. I get really scared. I can't watch horror movies, especially since I've had kids. I can't do it. I'm going to do it for yours. Do you get scared when you write? Like, do you scare yourself and spook yourself sometimes? Like, while you're writing? You know what I mean?
yeah. I mean, The Perfect Mother is like, I think it's tense, you know, and like I always know, I knew how it was going to end, so like I was like, it was fine and stuff. The book I'm writing now has a little bit of a haunted house thing to it. And like yesterday I have this little studio that I write at, and I opened the door and somebody was standing there, and I like screamed so loud she dropped her coffee, and I was like, I'm sorry, I'm writing this haunted house book. It's a little weird, but I actually cried a lot during writing this, and I have this part of my process is that when I get to a point where I feel like I'm getting closer to I have a pretty solid draft, I call my mom who lives in Buffalo, and I read her the book, like the whole entire thing, and I'll call her and be like, all right, make your tea, and then she gets her tea and I get my coffee, and I like read her the whole book over the course of like 4 days. And like I'll cry a lot during that. And I remember with The Perfect Mother, like when I was struggling a lot with the ending, and then she, you know, so I like called her and I was like, okay, I'm ready to read the last chapter to you. And like I read it, and then I was like, I wept for like 3 hours, and I was like, okay, I'm done. Like I knew then that if I'm making myself cry with it, then I can.
They should teach that in those writing classes you don't take.
Calling my mother?
And the crying thing. No, I think, and it's funny, Linda, you say, because that immediately a thriller is not what I normally go to. I loved that book so much, and I realized, because I've read a few things that are a little more thrilling than usual, and I really like them. So I think I might even try something else crazy that I don't think I like. Yeah, but I really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was It was awesome. One more question, or I don't know how many more.
There's some questions here.
What?
Oh, there's some questions here.
Yeah, right here.
So, what are you guys working on next?
What are you working on?
I'm working
Haunted
on
House.
I'm working on a novel set in Sag Harbor called Drawing Home. And it's about a woman, a single mom, who works at the front desk at the American Hotel. And at the start of the summer, her teenage daughter mysteriously inherits like the biggest mansion on the water. And as she's trying to sort out why and how this happened, a society woman from Park Avenue, an art patron, descends upon the town to try to wrest the house away from her. So that's coming in May of next spring.
Well, yeah. I've abandoned about 5 books over the last year, but I'm pretty deeply into some research of one that I think could work out. Although the other day I was in Trader Joe's and I was thinking I would really like to set a book in Trader Joe's. And I was thinking of a word with T. I don't want to be so flat-footed as to say terror at Trader Joe's, but I'm looking for the right alliteration. So if anyone has a good idea, just find me on Facebook and email me.
I'm thinking.
So a little bit more. So the book is called The Hiding Place, my second book, and it's about this newlywed couple who get married after just knowing each other for 3 months, and they leave the city and they move upstate, and they buy this Victorian mansion that needs a lot of renovation, and it turns out it was the site of the first domestic violence shelter in the country.
Oh, wow.
And the reason it was abandoned, which they don't learn until after they move in, is because one of the residents was murdered in the building, and they never sort of caught the person. And so the husband is a therapist, and the wife is like upstairs, and he opens his office in the ground floor of the building, and she's upstairs managing the renovations, and she starts to hear voices. And so a whole bunch of shit happens after that. I can't
love when a whole bunch of shit happens. That sounds great.
Paging Hollywood.
Yeah.
Actually,
this one's going to be a movie, right? This one, this
has been optioned for a film, produced by and starring Kerry Washington.
So awesome.
And actually, I can announce this now because I just got the announcement today, but the second book was optioned by Steven Spielberg's company, Amblin.
And no classes. Aimee, that's so cool. Congratulations.
Hey, I just have to write it, so I'm not actually finished with it.
No pressure.
No, it's terrible.
That's it.
All right, my question is, Anne-Marie and I belong to a book club, and it's been a book club that we take very seriously. We've been part of this book club for over 10 years, maybe a little longer. And I was just wondering if any one of you belong to a book club. What are you reading?
I belong to 2 book clubs. Okay. I belong to one book club that is former magazine editors. I used to be the editor-in-chief of McCall's and a few other magazines like that. Then there's also the one I refer to, or my husband refers to, as my young book club, because it's mostly people who met at McDowell and got an MFA. But when I graduated from college, there weren't that many MFA programs, so it never crossed my mind. And that's why I read The Dark Flood Rises, Margaret Drabble. That was with my contemporary book club. And the other one, we just read this book I could not understand a bit by Murakami, but I can't remember what we're reading next.
I'm not first of all, that's a great question, and I'm always happy to hear about book clubs and anyone who's in them. I think it's so important and creates this kind of wider community. I used to be in a book club. I worked in book publishing and publicity, and my boss at the time had a book club where all of her former assistants came. Aye. One of them is here today. Sherry Paul was in that book club, famed book club of 20 years ago. Jane Byrne of HarperCollins, who's still there today, had this book club of all her assistants. But once things got busy, and I haven't had one in a long time, although I feel like with this great group of writers in New York who all know and support each other, I feel like we had this informal book club where we're all reading each other's books and talking about it and helping to spread the word. So I feel like that's my version of a book club today, which I cherish.
I'm not in a book club.
Shocking. You're too busy.
I don't have time to read. Who has time to read?
Exactly.
Question.
How do you make the time to read?
I have a quick question on your process of writing. Do you ever find that your characters get away from you? Like you have them going down one path, and all of a sudden they're somewhere else, and you have to kind of rein them in, or do you let them take over the story?
Characters always do that. They start to feel like real people to you. And sometimes when you're finally finished with the book, you have sort of a bereavement hangover because you kind of miss them.
No, I mean, it's funny because the second book that I'm working on, I sold it at 100 pages, and I have to write 200 more. And I said to, I was like, my agent was really keen on me doing this. And I was like, well, what if the characters don't behave? Like, I'm going to sell this idea, but what if they screw everything up for me? And she's like, aren't you in charge of that? And I was like, no, actually, I have no control over anything they're going to do. So you just have to be open to that.
I don't feel like the characters get away from me. I think writing is all about making choices every day, and sometimes you make the wrong choice, and then you realize, oh, I've hit a wall, I need to redirect. But for me, it's more actually about the story turns than the characters.
We want to thank you all for coming to join us on this beautiful summer reading kind of day. Enjoy summer reading. If you have questions about titles, again, find everybody on Facebook. Like us, and I'm Reading with Robin on Facebook. And go see John. Buy these awesome books. And Sally and Aimee and Jamie will sign them for you. And if you're going anywhere this summer and you need to bring a host gift, there is nothing better than an autographed book. Thank you all so much for coming. Enjoy the day.
And thank you, Robin. Thank you all.
Susie.
This was so memorable in so many ways. But one of the ways in particular was the noise at the beginning. And I think all four of these ladies deserve a round of applause because that was unbelievable how they could keep going and concentrate. So thank you all very much. It was great. Thank you all. And buy books.
Buy books. Wow.